Welcome back, part 2 in the how to build an end grain cutting board. Today we're going to do the final glue up, get this thing sanded down and finished the product. That sounds good? Stick around. Hey and welcome back to the Woodgrafter. I'm Andy Guile, and if you're new here, welcome on board. Our mission is to inspire, educate and support you in your journey to becoming a better woodworker. Now we do that through a whole series of video tutorials. We do tool tips, we do tool techniques, we do tool reviews, we do news from the industry. Every month we get together for a jolly old chat, and we also do quick project builds series such as this one. We also have a website, www.thewoodgrafter.com, and over there you're going to find deep project builds, step-by-step guides on how to build something, going into a lot of detail that you need to produce a product, supported by plans and a store where you can buy the products that we use inside the Woodgrafter. So if you're not a member of the YouTube channel, subscribe now, give me a thumbs up and leave a comment. I respond to each and every one. And if you're not a member of our community, pop over to the website and grab yourself a free membership. And with that said, let's finish this cutting board. So this is what we're making. It's an end grain cutting board, and we're making it out of cherry and out of hard maple. In the last episode we got to this stage where we'd glued up the first panel and we'd cut it down to these strips. Now if you remember, I had a hell of a lot of burning on the material, and I've just simply sanded this down. These aren't the same size yet, we need another sanding once it's glued up. But I wanted to get rid of that burning so I could just see the quality of the product that I'm making. Now we had some really great feedback about why I got the burning that I did. Remember what I did? I took the board, I put it underneath the festool rail, put a stop and press the board up to it and then cut. Now what was happening in the approach that I use is the blade was pinched between the board. It couldn't move to the right and it couldn't move to the left because I clamped it down. Bit stupid and a bit obvious when you say that, and therefore the blade couldn't clear the material it was cutting and it was pinched. Now the result of that was excessive burning in the material, and I also broke the blade. The blade got too hot during that exercise and now it's just taking the edge off, so it's not cutting cleanly. The good news is I bought some aftermarket blades so we can do a review of those further down the line, and the better news is I managed to salvage it by sanding it with my festool sander just to take off those burn marks. And now I'm back to where I should be, and that's at this glue up. Now a couple of things to think about during this glue up. We want to get everything as flat as we possibly can, so I'm referencing it on the actual clamps itself onto these wooden bars, and I've got 3 of those to give me a good reference surface. The other thing is that all these checks need to line up, so I want some sort of straight edge that I can just quickly line these up to, and then just by eye I want to make sure that everything is looking good as I want it to, because once this is glued there's no going back. This is your final product, so it makes sense to take your time to line these up during the glue up. As always, I'm going to come in with Titebond 3, we looked at that in the last episode, the same glue, and that's because it gives me a longer opening time, allowing me to position these things. It's waterproof and also it's food safe, so that's perfect for a cutting board. So other than lining this up, there's not an awful lot of complexity in the glue up. Just going to take these out of the way for a second to give myself some room to work. I'm just going to lie these with the glue faces upwards. Like so, and I'll coat these with glue, I'll assemble that, and then I'll bring in the next ones that we've just moved and we'll assemble those, and that's just so I've got some room to work on these clamps. As always, I'm going to use my brush to spread this, got my glue ready to go, and a damp rag just in case. Now again, I'm only putting glue on one surface, so I need to make sure I have a nice coating of glue on the material. Okay. Now just before you put these together, just check as that glue levels off that you've got no bare wood. You see it here and here. You just want to make sure that that is really covered up. Pay attention to the ends. That's where you likely to have the problem, and you're looking for, as always, that slightly thicker than translucent coverage right across that board, and that looks good to me. And then bring these together and just line up that so you get those checks. Now with Type Bond 3 you get this nice long opening time, so you don't have to rush and kill yourself on this one. Type Bond 2 does a job just as well, but you get a shorter opening time, which can just give you a little bit of stress, and we don't like stress in our lives. Okay, ooh, that's a lot of glue. Okay. Okay, then again, once you've got that on, just check yourself. Make sure everything's covered up and there's no bare wood, like that end there, for example. And when you're happy, assemble this. Again, loosely line up those check marks. Now when you're ready to climb, you just want to make sure that all this is looking nice and flush at the end. It will be a bit tight because the glue will be biting by now. And then just check by eye and just adjust anything you're not 100% happy with. I'm just trying to make sure that all these checks look lovely and lined up. This is looking good. Maybe that one. Because once this is clamped and dry, there's no going back. Okay. Make sure everything is nice and flush and flat against the clamps. Like so. And then the slightest of clamping pressure. Don't want to go too tight on it just yet, because if you do, you'll bow the board, it'll spring upwards in the centre, and that's not what we want. So I'm just checking that that is nice and flat. I'm just going to come in with some alternating clamping pressure, like so, and this will just stop that board bowing for you. And again, clamp that lightly. And once you're happy that everything is nice and flush, crank down on the clamping pressure. You should start to see these little balls of squeeze out now. That's what you're looking for, consistently across your joints. Just clean off any glue to make life a little bit easier, a bit kinder on our tools on the next step. So this is looking quite good now. We're going to leave this to dry off for a few hours. It's say about 11 o'clock Sunday, so I'm going to leave this till about 5 today. Then we'll take those clamps off, and then we'll look at the next step, which is flattening this board and trimming it down to its final length before we apply the finish. See you in a minute. So I've now let that dry overnight, so it's all nice and hard, and I've taken it out of the clamps, and this is what we're left up with. We've now got this rather nice, I guess, makings of an end grain cutting board. Next job is I want to flatten this surface, and for that I'm going to use my newly acquired belt sander. Just clamping it to a flat tabletop, couple of dogs here, couple of face clamps here, and then I'm just going to come in and flatten this over. I'm going to start with a 40 grit paper, and then I'll probably progress to an 80 grit paper, and then probably just finish off this exercise round about 100 grit paper, and that should bring this all down nice and level. So I'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back together and look at the next stage. I'll see you in a minute. Okay, so I've used the belt sander now to bring this down to a 110 grit finish, which is looking really good. I'm really pleased with all the joints have come out really nice and tight. There's no gaps anywhere on either side of this board, so it really is a perfect example of an end grain cutting board. Can't see the checks too much yet, but don't forget that's got sand dusted down inside that as if we've been sanding it, so we'll wipe that down in a few moments before we put the final finish on. I'll just razor grey and then give it a light hand sanding just to get it ready. But the next job is I need to bring this down to square These edges aren't perfect, they're a bit jaggledy as we've not quite lined things up perfectly, but that's okay, that's to be expected. So I'll use a track saw to come in and give me 4 beautiful edges around this one, and then give that a light sanding, again using the belt sander but in its static tabletop mode, and then we can go to the router table and put the final finishes on this. So let's get cutting. So here's our setup. I'll put my fence in its narrowest position so it can go underneath the rail and give me some support on the board. I've marked up a straight line so I can actually make this my reference cut on the board here. And I've dropped a brand new blade in this because some idiot broke the last one by burning it out earlier in the project. So with that done, I can now come in, make a cut, use a reference, trim both ends off, come back, make the final cut on the board. And this is where you know that you've done well. I mean, look how thin these strips are I've just taken off that board, and look at the joints inside it. Absolutely tight as you like and beautifully supreme. You can't even feel the joint if you just snap this. It's snapping on the wood, it's not snapping on the glue joint. Absolutely outstanding. And what we now end up with is a board that's beautifully flat with nice edges on it that don't actually need sanding at all. So we're in really good shape. Okay, so I'm over here at the router table. I've done the usual setup. I've dropped in a round over bit and I've leveled up the bearing to the front of the split fence. I'm going to come in with a test piece of wood, a scrap, just so I can get that sort of kind of profile that I want. All I'm doing here, this cutting edge here on the router bed, I'm just eyeing it up on the corner of the stock to see whether that looks nice enough. Okay, we'll go with that. So now I'm just going to come with our board and just put a nice shallow, and put that nice round over profile on all these edges. There you go. Nice bit of hand sanding now, just to take off the sharp edge of the round over, and that's going to look pretty fine. Just going to come in with a hand sanding block now. This is 240 grit paper, and just with that round over, I use this little shoulder line, this hard shoulder line. I just want to lightly take it off. You don't need much, but you just want to round that profile into the surface, perfect, just to give you that nice smooth finish that you're looking for. Then a light sand over, just take things like this out. And then the final thing is, I just want to take off the sharp edges here, hang it over the side of the table a little bit, and then just round that corner off just to match the profile that you've just put on the edges. And this is where we are up to. We now have a very nice looking end grain cutting board. All the checks are beautiful, all the joints are really tight. We've got this beautiful rounded profile on the edges and on the ends. That's looking really good. Now before I actually put the coat of finish on this, the next thing I want to do is just put a juice groove round the outside of this board. Let's look at that. Ooh. For this job I'm going to make use of my Festool MFS, my multifunction square. This is a 700 version of it. But if you've not got that one, and let's be honest, who has, then you can equally make a wooden frame around your cutting board that's going to give you the guide that you need for that juice groove. Now you can also use the router table for this. You can set stop blocks up so your start and your end, you can move it across and turn it round. I find that slightly tricky to line up the grooves at the corners, so you don't always get that beautiful crisp line that I like to see on the final piece. So for that reason I use the MFS. Now I start off by first of all sizing this beast the size of the cutting board. So at that point, that square in the middle is the same size as my cutting board. Now this obviously needs to sit on top of the cutting board, so for that it's going to need some supports. I find my fences ideal for this. So I can just put one on either side of the board, and now my square is going to fit very, very nicely on top of that board, like so. I'll be using this 30mm bush on the bottom of my router, and that bush is going to rest and go round that square and obviously cut out the juice groove. Now this is 30mm, so therefore half of 30 is 15mm. I'll be using this bullet nose router bit to make the curve itself, and that obviously sits in the middle of that 30mm bush. So the centre point of this must be 15mm from the outside of this bush, i.e. this is going to cut a groove 15mm from this edge that this is going to run down. Now that will be true if you're using the festool square or you're making your own out of material, that the bush is always going to run down some sort of guide edge, and this will be in the centre of the bush. So if you had a 40mm bush on your router, the centre will be 20mm, and this would cut 20mm in from whatever your guide edge is. So I come in with my router bit, 15mm would come in about there, and as you can see, I think that that is too close to the edge. I want to bring it in a little bit further, and I'm thinking that probably 20mm is a good place for that groove to be. So I've decided I want the centre of my groove 20mm in from the edge. Now I know that with the bushing it's going to come in at 15mm, so I need to move this in by 5mm on all edges. So I can take a read off my scale. So here I'm at 36.3, so moving this in 5mm will move my juice groove in by 5mm, i.e. 20mm from the edge. So with that now sitting square on top of the board, about there, the centre of this should be 20mm in. Now because I'm using the two black fences as my guide, this obviously sits a little bit lower than these, so I need to lift this up a little bit. Now the reason I want to raise this up is how this works. So think about the router. The majority of the weight of the router on this edge is going to be over here, so this is going to have a tendency to tip. The kit itself comes with this little puck, and there's a 30mm cutout, and that just simply rests on there. And the idea is that that runs on this surface and keeps it all level as you go around the edge. If the surface of the material isn't referenced off the base of that square, then that will still tip, and that will give you a bad end result. So I'm just going to lay this on there like so. I'm just going to come in with some ordinary A4 printer paper, and I'm just looking to put a stack of paper in place here that will take me to that position, and that looks good to me there. So I can now raise the board up on that stack of printer paper. And now that should be sitting flush with the top, and it is. So when I now bring my square in and put it in its final position, this will now rest flush as I go around and make the pass like so. And I want to make sure that this is secure, so I'll come in with a couple of quad dogs and then just put a nice bit of clamping pressure here on this end. Just drop a couple of clamps in, and now I can just line this up here, keeping these fences tight to the board, and just make sure that that looks somewhere, well not somewhere, exactly in the centre of the board. And now clamp that into position. Now everything in here is secure, the board can't move anywhere, this is not going to go anywhere, so now I can come ahead with my router and route this thing out. And there you go, we now have a juice groove on the board. And what we end up with is a juice groove round the edge. Hopefully you can see that on the camera, looking good. So we're pretty much there. All we now need to do is to give it its final coat of finish, and this board is good to go. So for my finish, I'm going to use my favourite Osmo Poly Oil. This is a food safe, it's all natural products, there's no toxics inside this whatsoever. And not only will it oil it, it'll give it that nice waxy finish as well. And trust me from experience, when this dries, it dries really well, and this will not bleed at all as a board. Now the product of choice tends to be a mineral oil. So mineral oil is a good way to go for a cutting board. If you go onto Amazon or any of those sort of stores and look for cutting board oil, you're going to find mineral oil. Just be careful, mineral oil and cutting board oil are the same things, but cutting board oil tends to be twice the price. So look for the mineral oil. Make sure there's no toxics, make sure it's food safe, and you'll be good to go. Osmo is a nice product to use. Avoid vegetable oils. I've seen people finish boards with vegetable oils or olive oils. They tend to go off over time, and that can go a little bit rancid inside the grain of the board. That obviously starts to build up bacteria. So yeah, choose your product, take your choice. The finishing process is pretty much the same. As always, I use my 3M sponges to make sure I'm rubbing down into the grain to make sure all the particles are nicely blended, and then taking a light coat, rub it in, and look at that, instantly you see that beautiful pattern coming to the fore. And I love it when that happens. You feel like you've been rewarded for all the work that you've put into this beast, and that's beautiful. Oh dear, it makes you want to cry, doesn't it? Okay, so this is going to take a couple of coats. It's end grain is going to soak in incredibly quickly, so try and get a nice even coating at this time. Wipe that in. Don't forget to do the edges. I tend to use these old handles or spare handles I had knocking around the shop. I just use those as paint pyramids. Do the job nicely, and then do the business end of the board. Make sure you rub well down into your groove. Okay, I'm just going to allow that to dry now for about 10 or 15 minutes or so. Then I'll just give it a quick rub off with a dry part of my pad. And that's just so I've not got any pooling going on. I'll then let that soak in for an hour or so, and I'll come back and I'll put on the next coat. And I'm going to think, because it's end grain, probably about 3 coats. So I'll keep repeating that process. Apply a coat, let it dry for 10 minutes, wipe off the excess, let it dry for 2 hours and soak in. Apply a coat, 10 minutes, 2 hours, apply a coat, 10 minutes, 2 hours. And 3 coats is normally enough, because you are working on end grain, and that does really start to suck it in. And you can already start to see, even though we've just done this, dry patches beginning to appear. So you're going to keep applying oil till you no longer get those dry patches, and once you've got to that point, leave it overnight, give it a final buff off if you wish with a clean white scourer, and it's good to go out to your customer, or in my case, up in my kitchen, where it's going to be used for bread and the like. Come back and see the end product. And there you go, we have a cutting board. All nicely finished. This has had 3 coats of the oil on it, and as you can see, it looks rather beautiful and splendid. That needs to dry for 24 hours, and then that's it. The job's a good one. To maintain it, every now and then I'll just recoat it with that same oil. I'll give it a light washing after use just to make sure all the bacteria doesn't build up on it. But that's really, really nice. Really pleased with how that's come out. Excellent job. Now, to be honest with you, making the cutting board was actually harder than I thought it was going to be. I started it because I wanted one, first of all, in the house. But also for it to be a very, very quick weekend project. It's taken about 2 weekends, but that's really because there's a lots of drying time as you glue things up, wait for it to dry, get to the next preparation, glue it up, and then 3 coats all soaking in for a period of time. So it's quite lengthy in terms of a lapse, probably 2 weekend project, not the 1 weekend project I anticipated. And there's quite a few technical skills inside there in terms of the laminations and the jointing and the flattening and the sanding and the construction and the design and the juice groove. So there's quite a lot of technical stuff inside there. So it's actually well worth making one and testing yourself. I'll be making many more of these, all different designs, as I start to launch the craft side of the business. But yeah, really pleased, really pleased with that. Great job. Hope you found it useful, and I'll see you next time. Take care.